The Dragon Story. Chapter 6. The Battle. Bang! The two massive dragons flew right into each other, wrapping their claws around each other's bodies in a tight grip, wings flapping as they became a single ball of fury, and wings and necks and heads and spines and tails twirling in the air. Wings flapping, their heads bobbing around, each trying to find a place to bite their teeth into the neck of the other. Flames shooting out of their mouths every now and then, each trying to scorch the other in the face, each protective of their eyes, for if the flame hit their eyes they would not be able to see. Because they were now wrapped around each other, twirling and spinning, wings flapping, they were not able to hold themselves up in the wind, and so they began to fall. Twirling and flapping in a ball, flames shooting, they began to plummet fast toward the ground. 1,000 feet, 900 feet, 800 feet, 700 feet. The screeching was deafening. Bub and his granddad had to hold their hands to their ears because it was so loud. Smokey stood next to them looking, his eyes wide open, terrified. What would happen? Smokey's mom had landed next to him, not knowing what to do. She wanted to help, but the two dragons were too massive, and their claws and flames were too much for her to try. Falling. 600 feet. 500 feet. If they didn't let go and begin to fly, they would both land in a crash and most likely die, and shake the ground with a thunderous sound. 400 feet. 300 feet. The two dragons looked like they were both intent on holding on, not letting go, digging their claws into one another and still trying to find a way to bite into the neck of the other. And then, right out of nowhere, shot out of the clouds, came shooting 5, no 6, no 7 dragons, all different colors. Not as big as the two giant ones, but the size of Smokey's mom. 3 from the clouds, and 4 from out of the trees, one yellow, another green, another bright purple, another dark blue. They came out of nowhere with loud screeches and spitting fire, right toward the falling ball of the red dragon and Smokey's dad. At 150 feet, and with the 7 dragons now closing in on them with screeches and fire and flapping wings, the two big dragons let go of one another and flapped their wings just in time to stop their fall so as not to crash into the ground, almost touching it. The force of the wings flapping caused a huge wind that almost blew G-Dad, William, and Smokey to the ground, with G-Dad and William having to hold on to each other not to fall, sticks and leaves and branches flying everywhere. Back up into the sky, the two enormous dragons flew, the red dragon and Smokey's father. Seeing this, the 7 dragons chased after them, and Smokey's mom too. Up into the air they all went, chasing after the big red dragon and Smokey's dad. Higher and higher and higher. Right then, William's 2 aunts came running to G-Dad and William, completely out of breath. They had been watching from afar, not wanting to get too close for fear of getting hit by a flame. Worse, snatched up by one of the dragons. "What's happening?" they both asked. G-Dad put his arms around them. "Just watch out. They could be crashing back down here, and who knows what could happen." Continuing to stare up at the sky with the now 8 dragons chasing the 2 big dragons. And then, just as he said that, all 10 dragons began falling. No, flying. Straight back down, right towards them. The 2 massive dragons were hurtling down fast directly toward them, their massive bodies and flapping wings casting dark, dancing shadows over the snow, flames erupting from their mouths, making it look like a flaming ball of inferno was coming down right at them. "Run! Go to the cave!" G-Dad yelled, grabbing Bub's arm to follow. But as they began to run, they both turned around to see what was happening and then saw that Smokey hadn't followed. Turning around as they were running, they saw that Smokey had instead jumped into the air and started flying straight up right into the battle. "Smokey, no!" Bub shouted. But right then the ground shook as the 2 giant dragons landed right where they had been, with Smokey right behind them, hovering above in the air, and the other dragons racing down behind him. The 2 dragons' massive heads swung back and forth as they faced each other, letting out ear-splitting screeches that echoed throughout the forest. Then the air filled with wind as the other dragons landed in a circle around the 2 giant dragons. Even little Smokey landed with a thud as part of the ring, trying to look as fierce as possible despite his size. The circle of dragons created a barrier, trapping the red dragon in his place. The red dragon looked around, looking at one dragon to another, sizing them up, thinking to himself, what would it take to defeat all of them? His massive head moved around looking at all of the dragons, clearly realizing now that he was outnumbered. He could easily take out Smokey, the little one, but to fight all 8 other dragons plus Smokey's dad would be too much. Steam curled from his nostrils with each breath, his tail moving back and forth as he thought about his next move. G-Dad, Bub, and the aunts stood there only 30 yards away, wanting to see what would happen next. Time seemed to stand still as the red dragon moved back and forth with all 8.5, if you could call Smokey a half-dragon, stood ready to jump into battle if needed. Then Smokey's father raised his head and released a terrifying roar, or more like a growl, something so powerful it seemed to come from the generations of dragons who lived before him. The red dragon's eyes narrowed as he took one final look at Smokey's dad and the ring of dragons circling him. And with a shocking suddenness he leaped into the sky, the wind from his massive wings sending branches and twigs and rocks everywhere. Within seconds he was gone, disappearing into the clouds in the sky above. Looking up at the big red dragon disappearing into the sky, the dragons in the circle then looked back down at Smokey's dad and rushed to see him up close in celebration of their victory. But the celebration fell short. Smokey's mother suddenly let out a distressed cry, drawing everyone's attention to the horrifying sight. There on the side of Smokey's dad was a deep gash, probably from the red dragon's claws, blood dripping steadily onto the ground. Then the mighty black dragon's head began to droop, his golden eyes growing dim. He released a long, pained breath and then crashed to the ground with an impact that made the earth tremble. Bub, G-Dad, and the ants rushed forward to see what was happening, afraid. The wound was worse than they had imagined. It was deep. "Oh no," Aunt Sienna whispered, her hand covering her mouth. As they stood there in the snow, the mighty dragon's breathing was labored and questions began to swirl in everyone's mind. Is he okay? Will he make it? Could he die? And then, finally, what could they possibly do?